Are we in a world war? Is that what is actually unfolding before our eyes at the moment? Are we experiencing a global conflict? And if so, at what point do we name it that? I'm not suggesting for right now that that is definitively what is happening, but this is a question I have been contemplating for a little while, and I think probably I'm not alone in contemplating that. And what is it that makes world wars world wars? Well, we have had two. Um, Perhaps really we experienced one world war with around sort of 19 years of quasi-peace. Again, I cite Richard Overy's book, Blood and Ruins, in which he sort of implies that it was a very loose peace, and that the war of basically six imperial powers from 1914 to 18 becomes a war from 1939 to 1945 initially of two imperial powers versus some kind of mountebank kind of states, some rival challenging states, Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. And both the British and French empires are significantly overstretched. Um, and then the war enters a different phase in around 1942 with the faltering of Germany in Russia and the kind of the rise of a kind of a tripartite alliance with the Americans, the British, and the Soviet Union, which really by 1944 has become the big, as the Church would put it, the big two and a half, and has become the big two by the end of the war. Um, do we look at world wars simply as wars where great powers face one another? I mean, if not, then we'd have to conclude that America has been waging world war almost continuously since 1945 and is continuing to do so at the moment. And as I've argued before, if you are in the global south, particular parts of the global south, which have seen essentially unrelenting conflict, almost non-stop conflict, then you'd be forgiven for thinking that that you're on World War, you might be into double figures by now. But the kind of the never-ending conflict conditions that some people on planet Earth experience makes our notions of World War look like kind of indulgences. While there was this period in 1914 to 18 and period of 1939 to 45 that you can read about in Waterstones on the 3 for 2 table, where there are books about great escapes and bombing raids and SAS missions and all of these sorts of things. War becomes kind of popular entertainment, or it can be Hollywoodized, and that's obviously where a great many people, myself included, when I was about sort of 7 years old, first had my first kind of education, for want of a better word, into what had gone on in my grandparents' generation. So, if we look at the world since Ukraine and Gaza and now Iran, and also Venezuela to some extent, and perhaps Taiwan. Perhaps we are in a period that doesn't see great powers confront each other directly. The USA, the Soviet, Russia. Before we talk about Russia, and China three nuclear armed states. Obviously, Israel, a nuclear armed state, France and Britain, nuclear armed states. But I'm talking about the major powers in the world, the Russia, America, and China. Dare not confront one another because they know it will be the end of their societies, the end of their civilizations. But what we do have is a transition, for perhaps a very violent transition from one order to another. You could imagine that the Nazis in about 1941 were envisaging the historical process they believed they were undertaking as the transition from one order to another, from an order based around the British Empire and that was soon to be replaced by an American quasi-empire, um, and the Nazis viewed having a kind of a kind of a fortress Europe from the Pyrenees to the Urals as a kind of a hegemonic continental resource bloc big enough to challenge the productive power of America and even perhaps even defeat it at one point, and to have a an anti-democratic, anti-liberal, um, autocratic, racially kind of ordered Reich from across Europe and perhaps even beyond. Um, that was the kind of the vision of building the future that the Nazis had. America has a vision of building the future. America builds a very successful future for itself, following the rejection of John Maynard Keynes' ideas at the Bretton Woods conference and various other international financial gatherings and meetings and agreements. And the version of the world that emerges after 1945, where a world of nation states that America saw as being the primary building blocks of its new kind of economic imperium, that would pull the rug out from underneath the various kind of tariff walls that European empires had created for themselves. These new nation states would be wonderful, eager pupils for American capitalist sort of and liberal democratic philosophy and tuition. Of course, what they would also do is provide cheap resources and cheap labor for American corporate power. And an awful lot of America's post-war wealth is built on this, which is why America wages savage wars and coups endlessly in South America and Southeast Asia and other parts of the world throughout the post-war era, making sure that national liberation movements and national independence movements that emerge as a result of the declining European empires do not inconvenience the desires of American capital. So, what kind of world are we seeing emerge, and what kind of world um, is likely? Um, I guess this is not a new argument by any stretch of the imagination. This has been bandied around many times. Really, in the last 10 years, there were many kind of rather prescient, I would argue, people cautioning against Brexit, saying you're not going to be wanting to be a middling power in a world where globalization, the kind of the world of Clinton and Blair, is breaking up, and what we're seeing is rival aggressive power blocks competing for resources. That's not going to be a fun place to be. And I do sort of scent on the wind that Britain's ruling classes have, in the second era of Trump, decided that maybe that's a fair assessment. Elite groups generally tend to move and tend to suddenly embrace new ideas and new beliefs, when the kind of the facts on the ground become inevitably become sort of clear as daylight, and the future looks inevitable. Um, there was a sort of a faction of the British elite class that thought these sort of kind of quite idiotic characters, normally kind of hedge fundy types, who believed that a deregulated, freewheeling, buccaneering um, Great Britain was possible, that would simply cut the cleverest, smartest deals between rival trading blocks. Well, for that, you need to have big populations of people to make things and buy things. You need to have abundant raw materials and resources, and you need to have lots and lots of cheap energy. And we're not doing well on any of those of those kind of measures. So this world of rival competing powers is a world in which is a world created by not absolute American decline, but relative American decline. Just as Britain experienced throughout the post-war decades relative economic decline, it was still by the 1980s in the top 5 economies in the world, and still I think we're still kind of 6 or 7 or something like that. If you ignore the fact that the wealth is extremely tightly concentrated and not distributed widely across the population, then we can have these sort of slightly ludicrous statistics like Britain is the 6th biggest economy in the world, but yes, it's still absolutely chock full of extremely poor people. There's not much point in seeing Britain as some kind of economic powerhouse if living standards are genuinely extremely low for around half of the entire population. But relative economic decline is where a country is no longer the primary economic power in the world, and relative to its contemporaries, it has declined in power and wealth, absolute power and wealth. And yet, it still, when you look on paper, living standards will probably for the next 10 or 15 years, for a great many people, still be much as they were. That, part of the reason for the kind of inchoate anger in America and America's political class is, of course, decades and decades of under Democrat and Republican administrations of stagnating wages and living standards and life expectancy, rising levels of consumer and personal debt, and a whole host of indices with things pointing south, and deindustrialization. The world in which we exist now is not the world that where America fought and won the Cold War by the end of the 1980s. It's not the world where Eisenhower built highways across America. It's not the world of Levittown, and it's not the world of kind of futurist expositions in the 1950s, wondering what kind of the kitchen of tomorrow would look like. It's not that world. It's a world where American outsourcing and financialization and the power of Wall Street has hollowed out the economy and left living standards declining, but also it's left America in a position where if it wanted to pursue a long war with Iran, it can't do. It can't do. It hasn't got the manufacturing base that it had in 1945 with which to do that. It has a different philosophy of state. It has a different belief in the power and the role of the state. And it, in a way, the Great Depression helped to build that philosophy of state, that the state can regulate capital, and it can manage capital, and it can manage capital's kind of vagaries and inconsistencies, and its kind of tendency towards chaos and conflict. And we've reached a point where that idea, through mainly kind of through right-wing think tanks, things like the Heritage Foundation and other kind of policy institutes funded by people like the Koch brothers and such like that, have demolished that notion, even though it's broadly true. And the example where it is broadly true is, of course, China. China, in some ways, has learned as much from Franklin Roosevelt as it has learned from Chairman Mao.
FanDuel is dropping bonus bets into everyone's account for the tournament. All you have to do is opt in to claim your bonus. But don't wait, these bonus bets are only available for a limited time. FanDuel, play your game. 21 plus and present in select states. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Max bonus $500 unless otherwise specified. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Instagram teen accounts default teens into automatic protections for who can contact them and the content they can see. Explore teen accounts and all of our ongoing work to protect teens online at instagram.com/teen accounts.
So, not to go off down that tangent particularly, but you have a world of relative American decline, where America was America from the end of the Cold War onwards was the kind of the unipower hegemon. It was able, its strategic kind of planning meant that it should, in theory, be able to fight 2 wars at once anywhere in the world, and win them. The idea being that it could fight in the South China Sea against China, and perhaps take on Russia in the European theatre, should it be so inclined. The Obama years were the first where we saw this kind of pivot towards Asia, this sort of strategic containment of China. That said, there had already been a strategic containment of China, and much of America's wars in Southeast Asia have been about that. It had been about containing Chinese expansion. And from kind of Nixon's visit all the way through Deng Xiaoping coming to see Jimmy Carter, all the way through to the kind of the neoliberal phase of the opening up of China under Deng Xiaoping, through to the accession of China to the World Trade Organization, which kind of absolutely exploded the process of globalization, radically kind of increased its pace and its capacity. China becomes more than simply just this very handy sweatshop for American and European and global capital to exploit. It suddenly becomes an economic force in its own right, and something by the Obama era worthy of consideration in terms of containing. All of a sudden, China was no longer this kind of helpful tool to extract wealth from, and was becoming a serious industrialized strategic power, strategic state planning led economic power in its own right, with a kind of a version of 5-year planning that didn't so much eliminate private capital as simply subsumed it to national missions. And the whether you can call that communism, whether you can call that socialism, or whether you can call that a kind of like an ideologically agnostic kind of national, almost Confucianism, is a moot point. But the thing that isn't a moot point is the results, and the results are impressive. You have to remember, of course, China is an extremely repressive state. China, in its dealings with African countries, sure, it builds ports, sure, it builds railroads, airports, and also hospitals and all sorts of other stuff. But it ecologically strips parts of Africa, and that's going to have serious consequences in the future. So coming back to the key question, are we in a period of world war? I would say not exactly, but we're not in a period that you could compare to the Cold War, for example, where tensions were contained. We are in a period of aggressive great power competition. A key reason for attacking and seizing resources in Venezuela, and a key reason for attacking and failing to do the same in Iran, was to pinch off flows of oil to China, and to
In 2024, a truck crashed into Kanawha Animal Rescue, where I work. 146 of our dogs needed homes fast. We asked for help on Facebook. Our story spread through WhatsApp messages and Instagram reposts. Immediately, people stepped up.
I'm here to foster.
And just 6 hours later, every dog was fostered. I'll never forget how our community showed up for us.
Learn how over 3.5 billion people connect to what matters with Meta at meta.com/community.
Now, finding a doctor is a little less challenging. United Health Group is investing in tools that make it easier for patients to navigate healthcare and pay less. These transparency tools help patients find providers, and this is the big thing: compare costs up front. The big picture? More transparent pricing benefits everyone. And these tools from United Health Group can help patients save hundreds of dollars annually. Learn more at unitedhealthgroup.com/commitment.
dominate them. So this is, in some ways, it's kind of like a proxy war being fought against China. Of course, all this does have the potential to become a hot war, especially when you have somebody as absurdly unpredictable, ill-informed, possibly, neurologically on the turn, shall we say, as Trump, who takes advice from everybody from the murderous dictator of Saudi Arabia all the way through to Netanyahu, to friends at the golf club, to Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, and the last person that he's listened to. The chances for the war spreading to Turkey, to another NATO member, and to possibly Pakistan, to destabilize countries all the way around Iran is certainly there. I know that the Netanyahu government have made it quite clear that they would love to have a pop at Turkey. I'm not sure that would be a terribly good idea. I think the Turks would probably give them quite a fight. However, there is some indication that Trump will pull back when there is the possibility of escalation, particularly towards China. But it remains to be seen when the next phase of this rolling global conflict begins, which I suspect will be China's seizure of Taiwan, which I think now appears to almost be a fait accompli. What that will do in terms of conflict in Asia. and what that will lead to. It's entirely possible America will do nothing. America is currently stripping out missile defenses from client states in Southeast Asia. Clients, faithful states like South Korea, so did exactly what America wanted for decades, on the understanding that they would be protected from their volatile neighbors such as North Korea and China. And now they have learned that this was a very foolish bargain. Not suggesting necessarily that they would get a better deal from the Chinese. So the instability that we see in the Balkans in 1914 was the product of a dying Ottoman Empire and rivalries between a Habsburg and Romanov monarchies vying for what remains in the Balkans. When we look at the causes of the Second World War, we see the not just the Versailles Treaty and the resentments towards the Versailles powers, but also a British Empire which is weakening, and an American imperium that has not quite stepped up to replace it. And so perhaps this period of extreme chaos and violence that we are living through will continue until there is some sort of general and generational great power settlement where America and China and Russia and as a very, very, very distant fourth party, the European Union, if it ever is able to establish some sort of strategic independence from America, come to some kind of great power understanding. You won't get that as long as Trump is alive, I don't think, or at least as long as he's in the White House. But you might get that possibly with a successor that recognizes the key lesson I think that Trump is teaching the world about America at the moment is that there are actually clear limits to American hard power. And there are clear limits to, American soft power itself has been squandered, perhaps never to return. But there are also key limits and key weaknesses and vulnerabilities to American economic power. And an American president that can appreciate all three of those facts will recognize that they are existing in a very, very different world, and America has a very, very different role within it. And it will take a generation, perhaps, for American society and culture to fully embrace that, just as it did, and perhaps never, perhaps we are still on that journey here in Great Britain to embrace our diminished status. Anyway, I'll leave you there. And these are just my musings. So no doubt the news will prove me conclusively wrong tomorrow. But being wrong about things is no bad thing. We will have to embrace a bit of that. Take good care, everyone. All the best. Bye-bye.
FanDuel is dropping bonus bets into everyone's account for the tournament. All you have to do is opt in to claim your bonus. But don't wait. These bonus bets are only available for a limited time. FanDuel, play your game. 21 plus and present in select states. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Max bonus $500 unless otherwise specified. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Few things are as uplifting as the greatest moments in sports. And nothing brings us together quite like Team USA at the Olympic Winter Games. From NBC Universal's iconic storytelling to the innovative technology across Xfinity and Peacock, Comcast brings the Olympic Games home to America, sharing every moment with millions. When Team USA steps onto the world stage, we're not just watching, we're cheering together. This winter, we're all on the same team. Comcast, proud partner of Team USA.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.